So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this presentation from the Urban Penguin, where we're going to be taking a look at indentation and its importance in Python. Python, to maintain a clean and organized code structure, relies on indentation to group simple instructions together into larger code blocks. Whilst other languages often will use curly or brace brackets for this, Python concentrates on making use of white space. Indentation should be maintained using spaces and not tabs. So, of course, if you prefer to use the tab key within your editor, make sure it's configured to be converted to spaces. When we start looking at the indentation level, 4 spaces is recommended. When we look at a structure that could use indentation, a for loop, we can see that we have the colon at the end of the for, and then we have 2 print statements. Both of these print statements are going to be included within the looping structure. So we're going to print the current number and a double underscore for each iteration of our loop. Finally, when we're finished, we move back to the left margin where we have another print statement. This print statement will be printed once everything has been iterated within our loop. When we look at code that might need the indentation, we've seen if already, but we also have elif, where we can test another condition. If none of those conditions are true, we can have an else block. And as we've seen, we can have for loops and while loops, as well as defining functions, which are all going to use indented code. But like always, the very best way for you to get some practice with this is to move out to the command line. So we're going to take a look at indentation in Python. We'll be looking at those code blocks, investigating the indentation level. We can have nested blocks, so let's look at that. We'll look at the PEP 8 standard, our Python enhancement proposals, and we'll be running the demonstration inside of PyCharm so I can show you some other elements to do and configurations to do with indentation. Come on, let's find that environment to work in. Hello and a really big warm welcome to my PyCharm IDE that I'm running on Linux. But it really wouldn't matter whether you're running PyCharm on Linux, on macOS, or on Windows. Now you can see I have a couple of very simple functions defined here. They use indented code, so every line that is part of the function is indented to the same level. So we can see that we've got an addition function called add and a subtraction function called sub. They both take 2 parameters and they return either the parameters added together or subtracted from each other. So very simple and something that we should be becoming a little bit more familiar with, although we don't need to know too much about functions just yet. We're just getting used to our indentation level. The default indentation level and the recommended indentation level is 4 spaces. I can see that at the bottom of my PyCharm editor. The indent is 4 spaces. But I can click on this and configure the indents for Python. And we can see that I could use the tab key for my indenting. I'm also using auto indent here, but I can specify that if we use the tab key, we would use maybe 2 spaces. As I go to the indent level, we can set 2 spaces. We also have a continuation indent. The continuation indent is set for 8 spaces at the moment, and I'm going to change this to 4. This is where we have code that is too long for one line and is indented. We can see that nothing has changed. I'm still working on 2 spaces. But I can go through then and reformat my file with 2 spaces, and we can see then that both return statements have moved in by 2 spaces. Whilst this is okay, it's not recommended as it's easier to read when we look at 4 spaces. So I'm just going to take it back to 4 and 8 for my continuation indents and click OK on this. Again, nothing is going to change in the existing file, but I can go back and I can then re-indent to my 4 levels. So the indentation level of 4 spaces is the recommended indent level. It enhances readability and makes your code easy to read and easy to maintain. The indent level is important so that everything within the function or within the code block is indented to the same level. So if I add in an additional line of code to each of my functions, we can see then that I'm having to indent them to the same level. But again, from a readability perspective, it's easy to see that both the print and return lines are part of the defined function. Now, so far, we've only seen the functions being defined. However, we can check that everything is working properly by printing maybe the result of our addition. So I can go into the print function and get it to print the result of adding 4 and 2 together. I can execute the code and we can see then that we're getting 6 printing out. So everything is working the way that it should. But if I messed around with the indent level, and maybe the print statement is indented to 2 levels, return is still indented to 4 spaces, we can see that we get an error on that line of the unexpected indent. If I try and execute the code, we can see then that I get the exception, the indentation error. But there's nothing stopping me putting both at 2 spaces. So although my addition is 2 spaces, my subtraction is 4 spaces, they are consistent in the indentation level. And as I execute my code now, we can see that it does execute with the 2 spaces, but it really doesn't make sense to mix and match my indent levels. Also, if I hover my mouse over the indented code, it tells me that we're breaking PEP 8 guidelines, and it's then suggesting that I can reformat the file. So we can tidy it up, especially if I've got a lot of code. We can make sure that everything is formatted correctly. Not only did it format the indent level, it also added 2 empty lines between each function and between the sub-function and my print. So it's tidied my code up, and the idea is that Python is developed to be a clean and easy to read and easy to maintain code base. I'm going to go through now and just take a look at how we can start working a little bit more with our code and different indent levels. So I'm going to have an answer variable that is populated from adding 4 and 2. And we can then look at our if statement, and we can run a calculation that looks at answer and does a modulus calculation. So you're using the percent sign. Modulus is dividing by a number and looking at the remainder. So if I divide by 2 and it's an odd number, we will get by 1. If it's an even number, we'll get the answer being 0. So answer modulus 2 being equal to 0, we can print then the answer is even. We have an even number. If I think 8 divided by 2, we don't have any left over, so it's an even number. We can then further start indentation. So I can have an if statement that's level with my print function, and I can test then to see if the answer is greater than a specific number. I don't know what we're going to put in here, but maybe if I put in 3, I can then start on my block of code. And now the print statement is going to be 4 spaces inside of the if answer is greater than 3. So 8 spaces in total from the left margin. So we can have nested blocks of code. We just increase the indent level to show that we're working with the second if block. If I need an else statement to look for my odd number, I move the else statement back to the left-hand margin, and I can create then a new block that then says, well, look, if our answer modulus 2 is not equal to 0, this is what else means, then we're going to have an odd number. We can look at the code as a whole, and I know it's getting a little bit more complex and a little bit bigger now, and we're meant to be just looking at our indentation level, but you can see working with an even number and an even number that is greater than 3, we get the 2 print statements that are being returned. Well, okay, let's test the else statement. If we then have 4 plus 1, then our answer is an odd number. So we can see that it is working, and hopefully we're getting an idea on both using Python and getting an idea on how we can keep our code tidy and indented to the correct Python enhancement proposals standards.